Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation on semantics. Let's start with the outline of the presentation. As you see, the first item in our outline is the background information, which is the term linguistics, in fact, because linguistics is an umbrella term for different topics of discussions like phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. Then we will talk about semantics. After that, we discuss what we mean by the word meaning. After that, we will explain semantic features, by which we mean those plus minus properties, and then we will focus on how these semantic features help us in recognizing different types of anomalies. After that, we will talk about semantic roles, by which we mean agent, theme, instrument, experiencer, location, source, and goal. We will then move on to lexical relations, including synonymy, antonymy, hyponymy, for which we have a very brief discussion on prototypes. And then we will talk about homophones, homonyms, polysemy, metonymy, and finally we will explain the term collocation. To begin with, linguistics is defined as the scientific study of human natural languages. And as you see here, the word linguistics has the S of science at the end, which shows that this field of study is scientific, by which we mean we apply a scientific method in studying this field. So when we say scientific method, we mean at least going through 4 steps or stages, like observation, hypothesis formation, experimentation, and finally theory formation. That is, we first observe, then we form our hypothesis, and then we test our hypothesis. If we come up with the same result again and again and again, then we form our theory. The next word in this definition is the word human, by which we mean that our focus in linguistics is not animal means of communication or the kinds of signals used by the animals. Of course, we might discuss some issues related to animal means of communication in order to compare it with human complicated system of communication or language. But the focus is not on animal language. Some of you might remember Nimchimsky, the chimpanzees, that was trained by a couple in order to verify or nullify Chomsky's perspective about the fact that language is species specific. The next word in this definition, or the next key word here, is natural. It means that we focus on those languages that have been naturally evolved or emerged through the history, and we do not focus on artificial languages such as Morse, such as, for example, Esperanto even, or Torchlight, and so on and so forth. And then the last word in our definition is the word language. Can we define language? It seems that language cannot be easily defined. The same is true about the word kindness or love. How can we define the word love or kindness, or even the word God? These words are abstract words, and as a result, they cannot be easily defined, at least for 2 reasons. Number one, they are subjective. They are not an object to be seen, to be touched, to find out any limitation for them, any border for them, and so on and so forth. And that is exactly the second reason. Definition, the word definition is derived from the Latin word, and in Latin it means to limit something, to put limitation on something, while we know that the word language cannot be limited in any way. Language is all the time developing. Some new words are added, some obsolete words are disregarded, and so on and so forth. So we cannot limit language. There is no border for it, and as a result, we cannot define language. Then the question is, what can we do with it? Because we define the word linguistics as the scientific study of human natural languages. When we cannot define language, then how can we have any scientific study of it. We say by describing it. Then the question is, which aspect of language should be described? Does language have different aspects? Yes, like human being who has two aspects, internal, his soul, and external, his body, flesh and blood, in fact. Language has also two aspects, competence, by which we mean the subconscious or the tacit knowledge that resides in every speaker's mind, and performance, which is the daily use of language. Now the question, as I mentioned, is which aspect, competence or performance, should be described. We say competence at least for three reasons. Of course, there are more reasons, but to save the time, we talk about the three main ones. The first reason is that competence is the knowledge without which there is no performance. The second reason is that competence is ideal. It seems to be perfect. That is, you cannot find any mistake in competence, while you can find many mistakes in performance. The person who is exhausted, the person who is drunk or addict may produce mistakes. For example, an addict person may produce j sound instead of z sound, and he might say, for example, I went to zoo, while he means really he went to zoo. The fact that j is produced is not because there is something wrong in competence, it's because of performance of the knowledge of the sound z, which is z in the mind, but it is produced as j because the person is an addict, for example. Or when someone is drunk, he might produce some words by mistakes. Spoonerism is a kind of language mistake. Professor Spooner told one of his students that you hissed all my mystery lectures, while he meant you missed all my history lecture. So mistakes are due to our language performance. Therefore, because of this reason, the second reason that competence is ideal, we should describe competence. The third reason is that competence is constant. It's always with us, even during a sleep, even when we decide not to use language to speak during the whole day, still competence is with us whether we use language or not. Now, we say that it is competence that should be described, but we said competence is a tacit knowledge. We are not aware of it. It's the subconscious knowledge. Then how are we going to describe such kind of knowledge? We say by describing the rules of language. These rules are, of course, different, such as rules of sounds phonology, rules of word formation morphology, rules of sentence formation syntax, rules of meaning semantics, and others, like, for example, rules of use or pragmatics. As you see, our focus here is on number 4, which is rules of meaning or semantics. Now let's see what we mean by the word semantics. Here, of course, there is an excerpt, a piece taken from an illustrative dictionary of semantics, or ILATS, compiled by Mohammad Firuzani, and it's available on Amazon and other vendors. You can also buy it from the Book Venture, the publisher, if you're interested in buying it. Now, based on this excerpt, semantics is the study of meaning in language. Then the question is, okay, what do we mean by the study of meaning? Before talking about the word meaning more in detail, focus on the word mean in the following sentences. We have 4 sentences. In each one, we use the same word, the word mean. The first one says, I don't know what you mean. The second one, as could be said by Humpty Dumpty in Alice in the Wonderland, says the word means what I choose it to mean. The third one says that she is very mean, and the last one, these are means of success. As you might have noticed, the meaning of the word mean in each sentence is different from other sentences. Each mean in every sentence has a particular meaning while we are using the same word. But the point is that the meaning of these means are different from each other, not because of the speaker's intention or will. Of course, it does not mean that we do not have any intention or will or wish behind the sentences we produce. But the focus here is not on the pragmatic aspect of the word or the use of the word. Rather, we focus on what the words themselves mean, regardless of the speaker's intention or will. In other words, we focus on those aspects of meaning that are determined by the language itself. Now, the question then would be, in what kind of meaning we should look for those aspects? Do we have different kinds of meaning? According to linguists, yes, we have conceptual meaning and we have associative meaning. Let's talk about them more in details and see what the difference between these two types of meanings is. Conceptual meaning refers to that kind of meaning which is literal, direct, conventional, by which we mean that everyone agrees upon that meaning. Denotative and dictionary meaning, that is, it is the kind of meaning we can find in any dictionary. This kind of meaning covers the most basic essential components of meaning. For example, when we have a word like needle, the most basic essential components of the word needle is that needle is sharp, needle is thin, it's steel instrument. In other words, needle has these essential components of being sharp, being thin, being steel. And the associated meaning is the figurative, the indirect, the non-conventional, the connotative, and the associated meaning. This kind of meaning covers the extra meaning, which is associated with the word by people rather than through language itself. So when we say needle, for example, the associated meaning could be pain, illness, blood, drugs, thread, or knitting, for example, in sewing. Now, semantics focuses on the first type of meaning, which is conceptual meaning. Now, the next issue we're going to talk about is semantic features, as we notice also on the slide related to our outline. In fact, the kind of linguistics we're dealing with, which is descriptive linguistics, we try to describe the different levels or the different linguistic units. Now, in order to be able to describe any units or any linguistic unit, we have to break that unit into the smaller parts to find out what components a particular linguistic unit consists of. For example, in syntax, we break sentences into the smaller parts, which are clauses, and then clauses into phrases, and then phrases into words. Even we can come up with morphemes and phones. Then we are able to describe. For example, when we describe pe sound, we do not simply say that pe is pe and it is different from be. We rather say that pe is a voiceless bilabial stop. And for be, we might say it's a bilabial stop, but it is in fact voiced. Now, for meaning, we do the same thing. In fact, we further analyze the meanings of the words into the smaller units, which are called semantic features. Such features, in fact, are helpful when we want to distinguish between words that apparently seem to belong to the same semantic category. Consider words like boy and girl. The shared features between them which make them belong to apparently the same category are human and non-adult. Now, the specific features which help us to distinguish between them are male and female. Another example is the pair armchair and sofa. The shared features are with back and with arms, while the specific features are for one person and for more than one. In fact, the componential definition of a word is the sum of all the semantic features of that word. For example, boy is plus animate plus human minus adult and plus male, while girl has the semantic features of plus animate plus human minus adult and minus male. In fact, these features help us to understand the anomaly or oddness of certain sentences, like the following you see on a slide. The hamburger is reading the newspaper. We understand that this sentence is anomalous, is odd, since we know the subject of a verb like read should necessarily have the semantic features of plus animate and plus human, while hamburger lacks these two features and as a result cannot be the subject of such a verb. In other words, componential analysis helps us with deciding which nouns can be semantically used in such a sentence in order not to come up with an odd sentence. The next topic of discussion, as was presented in the outline, the second slide, is semantic roles. In addition to semantic features, nouns have certain roles in relation to the verbs of sentences. But what we should pay attention to is the fact that semantic roles and syntactic roles do not always overlap. Something which is regarded as subject may be a patient, and something which is the doer of the action actually and is object of preposition can be the agent regarding semantic roles. If you look at the picture on the slide at the bottom right-hand corner, you would see that Maggie, which is object of preposition here in the sentence, the cat is bandaged by Maggie, is the agent regarding the semantic role, while the cat, which is the subject of this sentence, is the patient. So, generally speaking, the roles played by nouns in relation to the verbs are called semantic roles or theta roles. Let's talk about the different types of semantic roles we have, or the kind of relationship a noun might have with a verb. The first semantic role is called agent or actor. It refers to the person who intentionally initiates the action expressed by the predicate. For example, Galahad gave the book to Mary. The person who initiated the action is Galahad, therefore he is regarded as agent. Patient refers to the person or thing undergoing the action expressed by the predicate. For example, when we say John killed Mary, Mary is patient here because this is the person who has undergone the action expressed by the predicate or by the verb here. She has undergone the action of being killed done by John. The third one is theme. Theme refers to the person or thing moved by the action expressed by the predicate again. Constance, for example, rolled the ball towards Poirot. Here, the part after the verb can be regarded as theme. Next one is experiencer, the entity that experiences some psychological, probably state expressed by the predicate. When you say Margaret likes detective stories, in fact, Margaret is experiencing what? Liking something which is detective stories. The fifth one is benefactive or beneficiary. It is the entity that benefits from the action expressed by the predicate. Here, Jane is getting the benefit of receiving a story when you say Galahad gave the detective story to Jane. Number 6 is goal, the entity towards which the activity expressed by the predicate is directed. The ball rolled towards the pigsty. So here, whatever we have after the verb roll is regarded as goal. Number 7 is instrument, which refers to the means by which an action is performed or something comes about. She cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe, which is in fact a kind of instrument here. Or if you say, for example, John opened the door with a key, then the key is the instrument because it is in fact the means by which the action of opening the door happens. Location refers to the place in which the action or state expressed by predicate is situated. Margaret is London. So London is the location because the action or state, there is no action here. State is situated in London, in fact. Source refers to the entity from which something is moved as a result of the activity expressed by the predicate. Poirot bought the book from Margaret. Here, what we have after the book is the source, in fact. A stimulus is the entity causing an effect, usually psychological, in the experience. John didn't like the cool breeze, which is regarded here as a stimulus. The next topic to discuss is lexical relations, which refers to that part of semantic relations which deals with how meanings in lexicon are related to each other. We have different types of lexical relations or semantic relations. The first one is synonymy, a relation between two words with closely related meanings. Here we're not saying a relation between two words with exactly the same meaning. Rather, we're saying with closely related meanings, or when two words have similar meanings and not the same meanings. The reason that we're not saying with exactly the same meaning is that it is against the principle of economy in language if two words have exactly the same meanings and the same uses. If this is the case, then usually one of them should be removed from the language. So if two words are in synonymous relation, then it is usually the case that either the uses are different and they have similar meanings, or they have similar uses and the meanings are different. Now the following pairs, answer, reply, chair, seat, are the examples of synonyms with similar meanings and different uses. That's why for an examination or a test you give to your students, you say, please answer the following questions, and you do not say, please reply to the following questions. But you say, I replied to your email. Or chair and seat, if you mean, please sit down, you don't say, please take your chair, because if you say, please take your chair, then the person will take the chair and he might ask, then what? Because he does not take it as sitting down. So you have to say, please take your seat if you mean, please sit down. These are, as I said, the examples of similar meanings and different uses. We have examples of different meanings and the same uses, like the word single and ticket. If you go to the airport and you say, I need a single to Essex, then you get a ticket to Essex, while we know that the meaning of the word single and single is the person who has not been yet married, or something which is not plural. And the meaning of the word ticket is a piece of paper which allows you to embark on an airplane or a ship. But because we have a two-way ticket and one-way ticket, so the word single is used instead of one-way ticket. Anyhow, two important issues should be taken into consideration here. The first issue is that words have different senses, technically speaking, or have different definitions, roughly speaking. Now, which of the senses of each of the two synonymous words is considered when we say two words are synonyms? For example, goal and aim have one meaning in common, that is a desired result or outcome. But while goal has a familiar sporting sense, aim does not have this sense. It is not, I mean, the sense or the definition, the meaning, simply speaking, is not shared by the word aim. Furthermore, aim has the sense which is pointing a weapon or missile at a target, which is not shared with goal again. Therefore, we cannot simply say that two words have the same meaning and we say have similar meaning or closely related meaning because they have different words, have different senses. And the second issue is the stylistic differences. That is, for example, swift and rapid are used in formal context, while quick and fast are informal. So far we covered the first lexical relation, which was synonymy, and now we move on to the second type, antonymy. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the traditional view of antonymy as the oppositeness of meaning, but this traditional view is no longer adequate, since words are opposite in meaning in different ways, and we will talk about those different ways in detail. And moreover, some words have no real opposites. In fact, in modern semantics, we put aside this loosely defined notion and we divide the concept into three more precisely delineated categories. The first one is complementary, the second one is converse, and the last one is gradable. We begin with the last category, which is the closest one to the traditional view of antonymy. Gradable antonyms include adjectives which have certain characteristics. The first one is that they have the comparative and superlative forms. You say faster, slower, longer, shorter, the most precise or the most imprecise. The second characteristic is that they can be regarded as moving in opposite directions along a particular scale. That's why we can use terms or words like how and very with them. If you look at the following example, you would see that we have a scale of speed which is modified by the use of terms like very and fairly. So we have fairly fast, very fast, and on the other hand, in the opposite direction, we have fairly slow and very slow. The third characteristic is that they are at the opposite ends of a continuous scale of oppositeness with different degrees. That's why we call them polar antonyms. Here, the reason that we're saying it is continuous scale is because something that is regarded as hot in one context can be quite cold in another one. For example, what is regarded as hot in someone's oven could be quite cold with regard to spaces or in another planet. So as you see here, our continuous scale includes words like hot, warm, tepid, cool, and cold. At the end of each side, we have the word hot and cold, while the different degrees come between warm, tepid, and cool. The next characteristic is that one of them is usually marked. You don't usually say, how young is she? Unless there is some justification. For example, you want to put emphasis on something particular, or you don't say, for example, how small the room is, unless you want, for example, to emphasize the smallness of the place, as you might not say how short John is, unless you want to talk about something particular, or your language is sarcastic, something like that. But if you say how old is she, then it is quite unmarked, or how large is the room, it is unmarked. Now the next one is that, in contrast to complementary antonyms, where the absence of one means the presence of the other. For example, if you say John is dead, it means that he is not alive. In this kind of antonym, the absence of one does not mean the presence of the other. If a room is not large, it does not necessarily mean that it's small. It could be average, or it might not be large enough for you who are 10 people, but for 2 people is quite large. The second type of antonym is complementary antonym. Complementary antonyms, in fact, are pairs like married and single with certain characteristics again. They are not gradable. That is, in contrast to gradable antonyms, where you could say hotter and hotter and hotter, longer and longer and longer. Here you cannot say deader and deader and deader. They're not. You do not have the comparative or superlative form for such antonyms. The second characteristic is that the existence of one means the absence of the other. As we said for gradable antonym, if the room is not large, it does not mean that it is small. We said that it could be average, for example, or it may not be large enough for the people who are 10, but it's very large for 2 people. So it is a kind of a relative thing. But here, the existence of one, or let's say the opposite, the absence of one means the existence of the other one. If someone is not dead, it means that he is alive. The third characteristic is that regarding their forms, there are 3 types. They may be quite unrelated forms, dead and alive. Their contrast may be signaled by a prefix or suffix, attached and unattached. And there could be a kind of alteration between these two, a word with a prefix or suffix and one without either. Married, the antonym could be unmarried, as it could be single. Converse antonym or binary contrast is the third type. Such antonyms are in reciprocal relationship. If, for example, John is Mary's husband, then Mary is John's wife. Or if Fred is Jane's uncle, then Jane is Fred's niece. This kind of antonym is not limited to, or is not confined to, just personal or family relationship. Rather, it could be used for reciprocal social roles. For example, doctor and patient, lawyer and client, or tutor and student. So far we covered synonymy and antonymy. Now we're going to talk about hyponymy. Hyponymy is meaning inclusion. That is, the meaning of a word includes the meaning of another word. For example, when we say daffodil is a flower, the meaning of flower includes the meaning of daffodil. So daffodil is a hyponym for flower, and flower here is the superordinate or hypernym. The important thing to note is that the opposite relation is not implied. That is, we cannot say that flower is a daffodil. And when two hyponyms belong to the same superordinate or hypernym, then they are regarded as co-hyponyms. If you look at the picture, you would see red and blue are co-hyponyms, as red and purple can be co-hyponyms, or blue and green can be co-hyponyms. Now, with regard to the term hyponymy, the concept of prototype should be discussed here. As you know, a hypernym or a superordinate has different hyponyms. Now, among these hyponyms, one of them is the most representative of the hypernym, or the very typical of the kind of object or the thing or the animal which can be referred to by an expression containing the hypernym. For example, when you say bird, in some cultures or in some countries, the word robin among the hyponyms for the hypernym bird, for the superordinate bird, robin is the one which is the most representative, or is considered as the one which can stand for the word bird. In other words, when they think about bird, the first word which comes into their mind is the word robin, and not, for example, penguin or ostrich. But as I said, it could be somehow culture bound, or even the availability of the thing or the animal can be the cause for this consideration. For example, in some countries, a sparrow could be regarded as the prototype for the hypernym bird. Or when we talk about furniture, it is the chair which is more acceptable to be the prototype than, for example, bench or a stool. Up to here, among the lexical relations, we covered synonymy, antonymy, and hyponymy. Now we move on to homonymy. Now, based on this excerpt from Elot's An Illustrative Dictionary of Semantics, a case of homonymy is one of an ambiguous word, as if we're dealing with an ambiguous word whose different senses are far apart from each other and not obviously related to each other in any way. But here we should pay attention that the cases of homonymy seem to be matters of more accident or coincidence. Look at the different senses of a word like mug. The two definitions, roughly speaking, given in any dictionary for mug are drinking vessel and gullible person. Now, these two different senses, in fact, are far apart from each other, and there is no conceptual connection between these two senses or these two meanings, which is very different from a case of polysemy that we will discuss in the next slide. Let's see now what we mean by the term polysemy. Polysemy is a word that has several very closely related senses. So for homonymy, we said that the senses are far apart from each other, but here we're saying that the senses or the meanings are very closely related to each other. Consider a word like mouth. The first sense is mouth of a river, and the second one is mouth of an animal. Here, both senses, in fact, share the concept, a concept which is mouth. So the two phrases are clearly related by the concepts of an opening from the interior of some solid mass to the outside, and of a place of issue at the end of some long, narrow channel. Or, for example, when you look up the word spring in a dictionary, you will see that spring has different senses, like the water which jumps up, the season in which the flowers sprout, the object which jumps up if you press it, and the action of jumping itself. So what is shared between all these senses is in fact jumping. Now the question is, how can we recognize each of these two different types of lexical relations? That is, how can we distinguish between homonymy and polysemy? Apart from meaning relationships that we discuss, yes, we know that homonymy, when we talk about homonymy, we're talking about cases of, for example, an ambiguous words whose senses are far apart from each other. And when we talk about polysemy, we're talking about a close meaning relationship between the different senses of a word. But apart from that, how can we recognize homonymy from a polysemy? To answer this question, we should see how these two lexical relations are presented in the dictionary. The way homonyms are presented in the dictionary is like the following. As you see, we have a small number above each of these mates, mate 1 and mate 2, or we have number 1 above the first mate and number 2 above the second mate. Now, each of them might have one sense or more than one sense. For example, for the first mate or mate 1, we have definition number 1, definition number 2, and definition number 3, which itself consists of A and B. If you read the definitions, you would see that all those senses or definitions are far apart from the sense or the definition we have for the second mate or mate 2. Let's have a look at the senses for the first mate. The first definition is a friend or a fellow worker. The second one is a general form of address, especially to another man. And the third one, A, is each of a pair, especially of birds, and B is a partner in marriage. Now let's have a look on the sense of the word, as the second mate, in fact, or mate 2. It is used in chess when the king should be able to move, otherwise the game is over. Do you see any conceptual connection between all the senses given for the first mate and the sense given for the second mate? No. But there is a point here, and that is, among the senses given for a homonymous word, like the first mate, there is a close relationship. Even the fact that for example, for the third definition, we have A and B, shows that the relationship between A and B are closer to each other than the relationship, for example, between 1 and 2, or 3A and definition number 1, or the definition 3B and the definition number 2. In other words, within each homonymy, we might have certain senses, but those senses have a close relationship. But the point is that the relationship between all the senses for one homonym and for one homonym, and on the other hand, the sense for the second homonym, there is no close relationship, or there is no conceptual connection. But for a case like polysemy, in fact, polysemous words are presented like the following. We don't have any number above the word, a spring, for example. We have just the first definition, the second definition, the third definition, and so on and so forth. Now, here, as I said, there is a close relationship, meaning relationship between each of the senses of the word a spring, but we have just one spring with different definitions. So far we talked about synonym, antonym, hyponym, homonym, polysem, and now we're going to talk about homophone. In fact, homo means the same, and phone, you know what we mean by phone. Therefore, words that have the same phones or pronunciations, but either have different spelling, like the first group, flower, flower, pale, pale, two, two, the same pronunciation but different spelling, or they have also the same spelling. So we have same pronunciation and same spelling. The second group, if you see, bank, bank, race, race. So here the second one can be an example for homonym as well. The last kind of lexical relation is metonymy. Metonymy, in fact, is a figure of speech which is used or applied in two ways. The first one is when an aspect of something which is not a part of that thing, but is always associated with it, replaces the whole thing. For example, you might use the word light while you mean lighter or match. So you might, for example, say, do you have a light? By which you mean, do you have a lighter? Because you want, for example, to smoke a cigarette. Or, for example, crown can be used for monarch. Or, for example, sail for ship. An example for crown being used for monarch is for example, he is a minister of the crown. The second way is that the whole thing now replaces an aspect of it. For example, when you say England decides to keep check on migration, here by England you mean government. Metonymy, in fact, helps the speakers to create a new meaning in a way that it achieves economy and pithiness. So the use of metonymy is or lies in the fact that it achieves both economy and terseness. Consider a word like village. Village, of course, refers to a particular place with some characteristics, which are different from what may be regarded as a city or a jungle or any other places. But when we say the village has welcomed the construction of a bypass, the meaning of village here is not that particular place which has certain characteristics that make it different from a city, for example, or a town. Rather, by village we mean the people of village. So two things happen here. The meaning of village has been extended to include human features, because we know that by village here in this sentence we mean certain human beings welcoming the construction of a bypass, not the place referred to as the village. However, the original reference to location is still kept, because we know what we're talking about. The people are where? The people of a village with certain characteristics. So the economical aspect of metonymy is also kept, or can be quite observed. Metonymy also allows us to use a place instead of an event happening in that place. For example, if we say it was 2 years after the wall, we know that we're talking about Berlin Wall being torn down. The last topic of our discussion is collocation. In fact, when two or more words tend to occur frequently, this is regarded as collocation. Actually, there are the largest group of set phrases, or what we can call ready-made phrases. For example, we know that strong and powerful seem to be very similar in meaning. However, you never say powerful tea as you might not say a strong car. Rather, you say a strong tea and powerful car. Now, other examples are gain entry, concede defeat, suffer a shock, in which we have verb plus noun. We might have also adjective plus noun, a blind alley, a golden opportunity, a narrow escape, etc. Collocations are in fact divided into two parts, which are semantically and grammatically different from each other. Now, regarding the semantic division, the nouns in both sets in the previous slide, entry, defeat, shock, alley, opportunity, escape, are used in a literal sense. Entry means the same thing as entrance. Alley is a type of street, and so on and so forth. By contrast, the verbs in the first set, gain, concede, suffer, an adjective in the second set, blind, golden, narrow, have a metaphorical meaning. The nouns with their literal meanings can, of course, occur independently. Well, that was a brief review of main topics in semantics. Thanks for joining me in this presentation. You're most welcome to post your questions and comments onto my website at martinfruits.com.